putting an end to identity politics. This is the Kevin Jackson Radio Show.
Hey, so you're listening to the Kevin Jackson Show on KJRadio.com. My name is Liz Matory. I'm your guest host. So this week we found out that Prince overdosed. We already knew that he overdosed, but it was confirmed that it was a high amount of fentanyl in his system. You know, April 2016 was when he passed away, but fast forward to 2018, the word fentanyl or the drug fentanyl has become a commonly known word these days. As you know, we are in the middle of an opioid epidemic. They say that the death toll now has reached the heights of what was the AIDS epidemic in 1995, the height of the AIDS epidemic in 1995. The overdose deaths have gotten to that stark rate. And, I think, again, we all have to be mindful of what's going on. We've talked about it, for the past several Fridays already with you. As you know, unfortunately, I had a friend who overdosed in the summer of 2016. His particular drugs of choice were synthetic marijuana, and he used to take PCP periodically. I don't know if you can be a periodic PCP user, but it is what it is. But unfortunately, when you are friends with people who, abuse drugs, you sort of have an interesting understanding that most times there's a root. So some of you might have some friends who are older, for example, that have just had a hip replacement surgery or a knee replacement surgery, and they have been, prescribed, opioids for their pain management. Some people do get hooked on them, and the medication gets too expensive, and then they go to street drugs, which is, of course, heroin, and there, goes that cycle. But for the most part, it always goes back to pain management, not only physical pain, but psychological and mental pain. Another highlight of how our country has, developed, if you will, is that we have the highest amount of stress-related illnesses in the world. And of course, we can evaluate why and how that occurred over the course of a decade or 2 decades or what have you. I know a lot of you God-fearing people out there would believe that our going away from the word and the message and getting away from our church foundation has definitely exacerbated, if not made, the issues exponentially worse for the individual coping and dealing with the stresses and anxiety and depression of their day-to-day. And, Christopher, of course, was the son of Marion Barry, so he unfortunately grew up in the limelight, and he never really liked it. And I mention that to say that a lot of people who have these drug-related issues and also simultaneously who are entertainers, like singers or musicians, they tend to have anxiety and it's beyond stage fright. They're actually super duper shy people. And it's weird, because you think, they're in the spotlight and they're stars. And, I'm not saying that this is the situation with Prince, but it definitely, the news this week definitely kind of triggered this thought process for me. What exactly is fentanyl? So it's a synthetic opioid that is 100 times stronger than morphine and 30 to 50 times stronger than heroin itself. And I know for a fact, I actually just went to an event up in Harford County here in Maryland where the sheriff was talking. And unfortunately, a place like Harford, if you've ever driven from, DC, Baltimore, New York, the 95 corridor, you'll drive through Harford before you get to Maryland House. And, that county, as you will know, is a very rural sort of suburban community. Very beautiful, simple living. A lot of people commute to the different cities in the area to work, but then they, settle in their home life. But now, as of this last week, the sheriff had said that we have gotten to a record 100 overdoses in the last 3 months. So for the first 3 months of 2018, Harford County, a very relatively rural county in the state of Maryland, has surpassed their overdoses in the first 3 months of 2018. It's weird because it's like it's a Schedule II drug. There are other drugs that are highly regulated now that we could talk about in another session, but fentanyl had been approved by the FDA. And so why are we seeing deaths, caused by opioids and things that are allegedly supposed to be used to, again, manage pain, but they're so potent that, they can kill. And the types that are out there now are so strong that police officers actually have to, when they go to a place where someone has overdosed and they might be exposed to the drugs, they have to cover their bodies from head to toe because it's so potent that one spore of it can infiltrate your own body. We just have to really be mindful of what's going on. We have all these people who are passing away so quickly. I don't know if you remember Stone Temple Pilots. I told you I was an 80s, 90s baby, so that's why I refer back to one of the greatest decades of American music. Scott Weiland passed away in December 2015, and we don't know why, but he passed away in his sleep, and he had a small trace of cocaine in his system. He suffered anxiety, and he probably was self-medicating. Dolores O'Riordan, who was the head singer for the Cranberries, which is another fantastic Irish, of course, band of the 90s, she passed away just in January, and she also had a bipolar disorder issue, and of course many people, again, self-medicate. One of the most, poignant self-medicated people was Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston actually passed away on my birthday in 2012, February 11th, 2012. She overdosed. I think her system, she drowned, had a heart attack. She had Xanax, cocaine, Flexeril, and even Benadryl in her system. And I know there's a lot of conspiracy around her passing, but a lot of these situations, I'm assuming, how does this? Of course, and I wanted to mention Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson actually used propofol, which is a sedation drug that is used to put people to sleep before they have an intense surgery. And so remember that doctor, his house call doctor would literally, I guess Michael Jackson couldn't sleep, whether it was because of the pain that he had from, the amazing amount of, physical labor that he had to go through with his performance and practice. He apparently, whenever he practices for his concerts, he was just so intense with his, he didn't just practice, he would perform each time. So at the end of the night, every night, apparently, his doctor would drug him to sleep. We would never know, unfortunately, whether it was because of the pain, whether it was physical or mental or both. All this being said, we have to be more mindful of each other and also mindful of ourselves. We also need to admit when we are under stress. We need to evaluate what's going on, what can I control? I know my mom would always say, she'd say, you can only control what you can control. You don't allow people to have free rent in your brain. She's really big on meditation. She's like, I'll have one of my moments and she's like, are you praying? Are you meditating? Are you just, I've given you that book about meditation. And I'm like, yeah, Mom, I'm seeing it. And so, of course, she's just so loving and she'll give me so much information. It's kind of overwhelming, but I do recommend, there's so many things online. I don't want to do an advertisement for YouTube, but what I've done in the last year after, dealing with Christopher's death, I thought about visiting, a psychologist, but the first thing the psychologist said, she wanted to give me drugs. And I was like, I don't want to to have to drug myself in order to heal, and she would say, oh, just to take the edge off, just take the edge off. And I was like, no, practice of psychology and psychiatry, has pushed drugs as the first resort. And we as human beings and, patients, if you will, have to really push back and be our own advocates. There's so many holistic solutions. Again, there's meditation, there's faith, there's peace, there's prayer, there's yoga, so many different options. And it doesn't necessarily have to be through drugs.
He won't stop until he's the top-rated radio talk show host in America.
What kind of weird competitive freak are you?
This is the Kevin Jackson Radio Show.